I never imagined I would find myself in such a situation. My name is Jessica, and I always thought I knew what love and loyalty meant. I was convinced that my relationship with my boyfriend Ryan was all I needed for happiness. Ryan was ideal, caring, reliable, always understanding. We met back in college when our paths crossed amid the noisy campus. His warm smile and sincere look captivated me instantly, and from that moment I was sure that our union was fated. Together we made plans for the future, dreamed of a life together, of a home full of laughter and coziness. Our friends, and even our parents, saw us as the perfect couple, and I too believed in this idyll. But over time, something began to stir inside me that I couldn't put into words. At first it was a slight feeling of boredom, a quiet longing for the unknown, a melody of adventure that I heard somewhere deep in my heart. I started to question whether constancy was all that life could offer. Ryan was wonderful, but his love seemed predictable, calm, and seemingly without even a spark that could ignite something new within me. One early morning, I went to a local cafe to get my coffee before work. Usually I chose the same place, where everything was familiar and cozy, but that day it felt as if I were searching for something different, a call for change. It was there that I first saw Diane. He was sitting in a far corner, intently staring at his laptop, and his presence immediately caught my attention. His light hair slightly unkempt, and a subtle uncertainty in the way he sat, as if he were seeking answers to questions that felt so close to me, made my heart beat faster. We exchanged casual glances, and in that instant, something changed within me. Our first conversation was entirely innocent. I approached, ordered my coffee, and our eyes met again. He smiled, and his voice, warm and deep, spoke as though it were telling me something important and personal. We talked about everyday trivialities, the weather, favorite books, and how sometimes one wishes to escape from everything and dissolve into the vast ocean of life. I felt that an invisible connection was forming between us, promising something more than a mere chance encounter. And although I knew I already had Ryan, that meeting awakened long-forgotten desires in me, reminding me of the emotions I once thought lost. At first I tried to suppress that feeling. I knew that infidelity was an act that could destroy not only the relationship but my entire life. I convinced myself that it was just a passing fancy, that nothing serious could come of it. Yet, day by day, I sought opportunities to be in that same cafe, hoping for a random encounter with Diane. And then, after several weeks, our paths crossed again. I could no longer deny the fire burning inside me, and every minute in his presence felt like a breath of fresh air, vital and forbidden. I remember once, when Ryan stayed late at work, I decided to seize the chance. I told him I was meeting friends, though in reality I was going to the cafe where Diane was already waiting for me. We sat opposite each other, and I felt my heart pounding wildly while my mind searched for justification for what I was doing. Diane was attentive, capable of listening and understanding, and that was incredibly attractive to me. His words, his gentle laughter, and his warm look made me forget everything around me, including the stability and calm Ryan provided. That night, I felt as if I were standing on the threshold between two worlds. On one side was my life with Ryan, comfort, habit, and certainty about tomorrow. On the other, a world unexplored, full of danger and passion that lured me with its unpredictability. I knew what I was doing was wrong, that I was being disloyal. Yet something inside screamed, "Feel life in all its fullness." And so, in the half-light of that cozy cafe, as the city's nightlights began to twinkle outside, Diane came closer. His hand gently touched mine, and in that moment I felt as if the whole universe had contracted into that single instant. Our lips met in a kiss that was both tender and fervent, as if it were the long-awaited answer to all my inner questions. Returning home, I lay next to Ryan, tasting the remnants of someone else's kiss on my lips. My head spun as I tried to understand what was happening to me. why I had so easily surrendered to new sensations, why it seemed I deserved something greater than what I had. That night, two emotions warred within me: genuine remorse and the bitter pleasure of betrayal. I told myself that it was a mistake, that it would never happen again, that it was only a temporary infatuation that would soon fade. But how often do we deceive ourselves when our feelings overwhelm us so completely that reason is left with no chance? That first night marked the turning point after which everything began to slide downhill. Every time I met Ryan, I increasingly realized that I no longer belonged to him entirely. My thoughts kept returning to Diane, to his gaze, to his touch, to the sensation I experienced when I was with him. With each day, my life turned into a kaleidoscope of emotions, where joy and happiness mingled with guilt and the fear of being exposed. I began arranging secret meetings, inventing ever more elaborate excuses for my actions. Every morning I woke with a sense of dread, as if I knew that sooner or later everything would come out. But in the same breath, the nocturnal thrill and the sweetness of the forbidden made all my doubts seem insignificant. I remember one rainy evening in my small town, when I sat in the dark, cradling a mug of hot tea, pondering how I had ended up at this crossroads between long-awaited stability and a genuine yet destructive passion. Ryan slept, oblivious to the storm raging inside me, while I experienced both the excruciating pain of guilt and the sensation that I was finally truly alive. That conflicting cocktail of emotions was too powerful to ignore, and I realized that I could no longer go back. Thus began my story. A story in which every minute was infused with secrets, passion, and the inevitable pain of betrayal. I knew that what was happening could not be undone, that everything I had built over the years could crumble in an instant. Yet I couldn't stop. My heart demanded adventure, while my mind, yearning for calm and order, remained sidelined, powerless before the unbridled passion. After that night, when I first tasted the forbidden, the world around me began to distort, transforming into a kaleidoscope of contradictory sensations and agonizing doubts. Every morning I awoke with the awareness. I stood before a choice between the familiar, quiet life with Ryan and the storm of emotions that Diane brought. Days blended into an endless series of secret meetings, unspoken words, and the torment of guilt that seeped into every cell of my being. I tried to find solace in the bustling city streets and in the soft glow of a sunset, but memories of his touches and those fleeting moments when everything seemed possible would not let me rest. Sometimes, as Ryan sat at breakfast, unaware of my double life, I caught myself wondering how thin the line was between love and betrayal. His warmth, calm, and certainty about the future seemed to tell me that true love was about constancy and support. But Diane was like a flash of light in a dark tunnel. His looks, his words penetrated the depths of my soul, awakening a desire I believed had long been extinguished. I recalled every detail of our encounters: how he laughed quietly when I tried to hide my nervousness, how his hand would gently brush against mine at a secluded table in the cafe, and how his voice promised something new and unexplored. At times, I tried to stop the whirlwind of emotions, convincing myself that it was all just a game of the imagination, a temporary infatuation that would soon die out. But with each passing day, I realized more clearly that in this contradictory mix of passion and guilt, there were no winners or losers. I began to feel as if my inner world was fracturing. Two opposing forces were battling for my very self. Ryan, with his tenderness and care, and Diane, with his fiery sincerity and unpredictability, became symbols of two different paths between which I was forced to choose, not knowing where my true essence resided. One evening, during a raging spring storm, I met Diane again. We agreed to meet in an old park, where once I had often strolled with Ryan, enjoying the tranquility of nature. But now that park had become the arena of my inner struggle. We sat on a creaking bench, sheltered from the rain under a sprawling tree, and I listened to the rhythmic, almost hypnotic sound of raindrops on its leaves. Diane looked at me with such passion that I forgot everything except his presence. He spoke about the importance of taking risks and living in the present rather than clinging to the illusions of safety. His words reached deep into my heart, stirring a longing to break free from the shackles of a predictable life. That night, I realized I could no longer deny the force drawing me to Diane. Our conversations grew ever more candid, and our physical closeness became increasingly intense. I tried to hold back from taking the final step, fearing I would completely destroy what I had with Ryan, but every touch, every word from him sounded like an irresistible call. It became clear that I was living in two worlds, one with the quiet, predictable life with Ryan, and the other in a whirlwind of passion and doubt that Diane provided. Every encounter with him was both poison and remedy, awakening in me an exhilarating sense of freedom, for which I had to pay a steep price. Yet the internal conflict did not cease, even in moments of joy. When Diane and I would slip away into the dark corners of the city at night, I felt the creeping fear of exposure, the anxiety hidden behind fleeting smiles, reminding me that any misstep could change my life forever. Every little detail, a random phone notification, an unexpected touch, the sound of Ryan's voice, stirred a storm of emotions within me, mixing guilt with an overwhelming thirst for freedom. I knew I couldn't live in this double rhythm indefinitely. Sooner or later, the truth would surface and change everything. In those days, I increasingly began to wonder, what am I seeking in this endless game of double standards? Perhaps I was trying to fill an emptiness I had never truly known. Maybe I was searching for the acknowledgement that had been missing in my relationship with Ryan. Or perhaps I was simply afraid of stagnating, of drowning in routine and predictability. The answers came slowly, like raindrops gradually blurring the firm contours of my soul. With each new meeting with Diane, I increasingly understood that my life had become a mirror reflecting two opposites: stability and chaos, love and betrayal, hope and fear. These contradictions tormented me, forcing me constantly to balance between sincerity and self-deception. I felt like a prisoner of my own emotions, unable to separate reality from fantasy, with my mind powerless to halt the torrent of passions that carried me further from the person I once was. Then, after several weeks of secret meetings, I found myself at a crossroads, where my feelings merged into one raging storm. Ryan increasingly called, asking about my mood, trying to arrange a romantic dinner, but I responded distantly, as if part of me had already resigned to the inevitable. A fire ignited within me, and I realized that there was no turning back. In Diane's eyes, I saw the promise of a new beginning, an adventure that could give me what the stable love never had. And even though I knew that betrayal would inevitably shatter everything built over the years, at that moment I couldn't resist the temptation. The promise of a life filled with vivid, if agonizing, sensations. In the midst of this inner battle, I began to share my thoughts more openly with my friends, though I never revealed all the details. I tried to explain that the human soul is multifaceted, and that sometimes the longing for something new is stronger than familiar bonds. Yet my words sounded as if I did not fully believe them myself, as if I was trying to convince myself that it was all just a temporary calm before the storm. Inside, I understood that every minute spent with Diane was robbing me of a piece of the person I had been with Ryan. Every smile, every kiss with him increasingly became a scar that could not be erased, like a mark left by a memorable but forbidden passion. One late autumn evening, as the leaves fell, leaving only ghosts of days gone by, I met Diane in his favorite bar, where neon lights shimmered and soft music created an atmosphere of intimacy and mystery. That evening, he told me about his past love, about how he once lost himself in passion and shattered hopes. His words sounded as if he were trying to warn me, yet I could not stop listening, captivated by his sincerity and pain. An unspoken bond formed between us, as if our souls, both tainted by past mistakes, found solace in openness and understanding. For the first time I saw that even in the darkest corner of the heart, one could find a spark capable of lighting the way through darkness. But even at that moment, when it seemed we were closer than ever, I felt that the irresistible pull toward Ryan still lived within me. His image, his smile, his kindness could not be forgotten, and every encounter with Diane reminded me of the cost of true sincerity. My consciousness began to fracture under the weight of inner contradictions, and I felt as if the invisible bridge between the past and present was crumbling, leaving me alone with myself. That night, under the sound of rain and the whisper of wind outside, I first realized it was time to make a choice that would determine the course of my life. When I returned home after that rainy evening, with my inner world torn between the old stability and the storm of passion, I felt the weight of irreversible change. Every day it grew harder to hide my double life. Ryan, who had always been my anchor, now seemed like someone for whom I could never truly answer, and his quiet presence was a constant reminder that I was losing the love I once cherished. Within me a battle raged between duty and the surge of forbidden emotions, and I began to wonder how far I was willing to go to experience what Diane promised. Weeks passed since that fateful meeting in the park. Each encounter with Diane grew riskier, yet the more I surrendered to his charm, the more it became clear that I could not return to my old life. We began meeting almost every free minute, as if time itself were speeding up so that we wouldn't have a chance to realize all the consequences of our actions. Each of our encounters was like an explosion, leaving only the charred remnants of the familiar world I could no longer call my own. I often woke in the middle of the night, overwhelmed by both guilt and passion, unable to believe that I had allowed myself to drown in this maelstrom. On a rainy evening, when the cold wind seeped through old window frames, I found myself alone in my small apartment, trying to make sense of what had happened. Reflecting on how my life had changed, I suddenly realized that all these secret meetings with Diane were not merely an escape from the mundane. They were a genuine search for myself, for the true me that had been suppressed under the weight of daily obligations and habits. Ryan continued living his life, tending to his affairs, unaware that the love he so dearly held was slowly slipping away before his eyes. Every smile, every touch now seemed like a ghost of something lost, something I could never reclaim. One day, while walking on a crowded street with the city's evening lights shimmering, I moved, as if in a trance, recalling every detail of our encounters, his confident gaze, that touch which made me forget everything, and the soft, intimate word he once spoke. These memories were so vivid they seemed more real than the world I now inhabited. I knew that every minute spent with Diane was pulling me further away from Ryan. Yet deep inside a strange conviction was forming, a conviction that I had finally become the person I had always dreamed of being. Free, alive, authentic. As the days went by, I began to notice how even the simplest moments of life were now filled with anxiety. Every morning, waking up, I tried to understand where I belonged. With Ryan, who had long become a symbol of the past, or with Diane, who promised a new yet deceptive freedom. Over time, my conscience and mind started to rebel, and the internal conflict turned into an unbearable pain that tormented me day after day. One day, in a particularly gloomy moment when the sky was heavy and gray, as if reflecting my inner turmoil, I decided that I could no longer live in a world of double standards and pretense. I went out into the street, carrying the weight of unspoken emotions and endless regrets. The rain poured as if washing away the last remnants of the illusion that life could be simple and predictable. Wandering along the deserted streets, I tried to find an answer to the question, What is it that I am really searching for? Every raindrop seemed like a symbol of inevitable change, as if nature itself were warning me that it was time to make the final choice. But the choice was not an easy one. Ryan, despite his loyalty and love, remained for me the anchor that tethered me to what was irrevocably gone. His warmth, his gentle care, his sincerity, all now appeared both invaluable and painfully distant. On the other hand, Diane offered a world full of passion, adrenaline, and unlimited possibilities. But that world was like fire, bright, attractive, yet capable of burning everything in its path, leaving behind nothing but the ashes of lost hope. With each new meeting with him, I felt that I was gradually losing myself, dissolving in the whirlwind of emotions that provided a fleeting sense of freedom, but at a steep cost. A few days later, on a cool morning, I found myself once again in that same cafe where it all began, a place that had once been filled with joy and anticipation, and now only reflected the shadow of former happiness. Sitting at a table by the window, I watched the world outside slowly wake, trying to understand if what was lost could ever be regained. At that moment, an old acquaintance approached me, and her gentle yet troubled voice asked, "Jessica, what's happening to you? Why have you changed so much?" I felt each word strike me like a blow, yet I couldn't find the strength to open up completely, answering only with a vague remark that life sometimes plays strange jokes on us and forces us to accept changes, however painful they may be. That evening, when I returned home, I found a note left on the table by Ryan. His neatly written words expressed how he felt that our hearts no longer beat in unison, as if an impassable chasm had formed between us. Those lines struck me like a cold blade, and I felt an indescribable pain of loss tightening in my chest. I remembered all the moments when his eyes had sought my understanding, when he had silently listened to my excuses, trying to find an explanation for what I myself could not comprehend. But now reality had opened up in all its cruelty, and I realized that I could no longer hide behind the masks of lies and self-deception. Late one evening, in a moment of despair, I dialed Ryan's number. His voice on the other end was quiet, sorrowful, yet carried a tone of resolve, as if he had long accepted the inevitable. We talked for hours, almost until the first light of dawn, trying to sort out the labyrinth of our feelings. But even the most heartfelt words could not erase the marks of betrayal. They could not restore the lost trust. Every conversation reminded me that an abyss had formed between us, an abyss that no apologies or tears could bridge. And when our conversation ended, I was left alone with a shattered heart, and the realization that my life had now split onto two irrevocably diverging paths. I began to recall the times when Ryan and I were one, when every smile and glance was filled with purity and sincerity. But those memories now seemed like ghosts of the past, faint echoes of moments that could never be regained. With each passing day, I felt as if my soul were tearing apart, and neither of the two worlds, neither the world of stability nor that of wild passion, could bring me solace. I found myself caught between two fires, where every minute was imbued with the bitterness of loss and the awareness that I could never restore the tenderness and simplicity of what once was. This internal struggle, like an endless storm, lasted for weeks, and then months. I sought solace in the little things, the sounds of the nighttime city, the aroma of the rain, the quiet conversations with friends to whom I could never fully reveal the truth. Yet nothing could quell the fire that I had ignited in myself. And every new encounter with Diane left an indelible mark, a reminder of the price I had paid for my freedom. Standing on the threshold of a new chapter in my life, I realized that it was time to try to mend what had been broken, or to start anew, leaving behind the pain of the past. This choice became a trial, a test of my will, my spirit, and my ability to accept the consequences of my actions. I knew that, regardless of which path I chose, life would never be the same. and every step forward would be accompanied by echoes of pain and regret. Yet, despite all the agony, I felt that within that pain lay the possibility of discovering a new me, one who could learn to forgive, to understand, and perhaps find love again. Not the love that had existed before my betrayal, but a new love born from the ashes of the past. Having found myself in this vortex of emotions and fateful decisions, I began writing down my thoughts, trying to make sense of everything happening inside me. The pages of my diary filled with candid confessions, memories of both happy and excruciating moments, of laughter and tears, of love and betrayal. Every entry was like a cry from the soul, a means to remind me that life is not just about joy, but also the inevitable pain of loss, pain for which one must pay the price for sincere feelings. Time passed, and I started to notice that within my soul, something new was emerging, a quiet hope that the pain could be overcome, that I could learn to live with the consequences of the choices I had made. But even in that budding feeling, there was a trace of bitterness. For every new dawn reminded me that the past cannot be erased, that mistakes remain with us forever like invisible scars. I realized that every new encounter, every word, every touch was both an opportunity and a test, a challenge to my resolve to find a path to healing. Now looking back, I see how much I have changed, not only in appearance but in the inner world that once was full of illusions and is now resonating with the harsh yet true symphony of change. I know that the journey to redemption and forgiveness will be long and arduous, but with each day I learn to accept myself, to find beauty even in the most painful moments. In this delicate dance between the past and the future, I no longer search for excuses. I simply allow myself to feel, to love, and to err, hoping that someday I will find that harmony again. I stood before the door of his apartment, trembling with excitement and fear, yet determined that I had to at least try to make things right. In my hand I held a carefully prepared note filled with confessions, apologies, and a plea for forgiveness. Taking a few deep breaths, I knocked. The door opened almost immediately, and I saw Ryan. His face was stony, his gaze cold and distant, as if all the warm memories that had once bound us had long since vanished. "Ryan, please, give me a chance to explain," I whispered, struggling to keep my voice calm despite my racing heart. But instead of the conversation I had hoped for, he merely looked at me with a frown, as though I were a stranger, and in a quiet, almost contemptuous tone said, "I don't want to hear you." His words sounded like a final verdict, shattering the remnants of hope I still harbored. I stepped forward. My hand trembled as I extended the note, in which all my pain, remorse, and desire to make amends were laid out in simple, sincere words. But Ryan, without even looking up, coldly rejected my gesture. His silence was deafening. It said that all attempts to repair what had been destroyed were futile. His reaction was harsh and unyielding. I saw in his eyes an insurmountable wall behind which there was no room for my apologies or regrets. The words I had so carefully prepared got caught in my throat, and instead, a quiet, almost inaudible cry escaped me. I kept repeating my apologies, saying how deeply I had erred, how painful it was to realize that I had shattered our love. Yet Ryan simply shook his head, as if my words were empty noise, incapable of touching his frozen heart. At that moment, I felt the crushing weight inside me. The hope for redemption was drowning in an icy wave of indifference. Every word I spoke, every pleading glance, was met with the cold barrier of his indifference. He refused to give me a single chance to explain, not even to hear how I was ready to accept all the blame for what had happened. His rejection was final, as though he had long since made up his mind, and my very presence was but a painful reminder of lost trust and a broken heart. Stepping out onto the rainy streets, I felt every raindrop on my face as if it were trying to wash away not only the city's dust, but the heaviness of my shattered heart. After that painful farewell with Ryan, when his cold words left an indelible scar within me, I couldn't find peace. I wandered as if in a trance, not knowing where I was headed, and only the night's silence, occasionally interrupted by the distant hum of cars, allowed me to reflect on how I had gone astray in my life. I ended up in an old, abandoned park, where once the laughter and joy of our shared dreams had resounded. Now, among fallen leaves and the soft rustle of the wind, I sought answers to the tormenting questions inside me. Sitting on a cold bench, I opened my diary and began to write, pouring every thought, every regret, and every pain onto the paper. My pen chronicled how deeply I had erred, how I had failed to appreciate what I had with Ryan, and how the bitter betrayal had cost me a part of myself. In every line, I tried to find solace, as if every written word were a step toward redemption, a way to untangle the knots of remorse and understand that every mistake, no matter how painful, could serve as a starting point for a new beginning. Time went by, and I started to notice that within my soul, something new was taking shape. A quiet hope that the pain could be overcome, that I could learn to live with the choices I had made. But even in that budding hope, there was its own bitterness. For every new dawn reminded me that the past could not be erased, that mistakes remain with us forever, like invisible scars. I understood that every new meeting, every word, every touch was both a chance and a trial, a test of my determination to find the path to healing. Today, as I stand on the threshold of a new phase in my life, the light of hope and understanding overshadows the darkness of loss. I realize that true strength lies in the ability to forgive, and to give myself a chance to start over, despite all the wounds. My experiences have become the starting point for personal renewal, allowing me to look toward the future with determination and an open heart. This path has been arduous, but it is precisely this journey that has given me the opportunity to become stronger, wiser, and ultimately learn to love myself truly.